back on the record, this is the people of the state of Colorado versus James Egan Holmes, case number 12 CR 1522. The record should reflect that Mr. Holmes is present with his attorneys and the prosecutors are present as well. We are outside the presence of the jury. Let me follow up on an objection that I sustained shortly before the break. There was a question about whether Dr. Gurr had reached out to Gargi and to Ms. Data and Mr. Garcia. And if you want Dr. Gurr to step out, I can ask her to step out, either one of you. And I sustained the objection, and I think I assumed that this was the same issue that we talked about at the bench in terms of some kind of legal counsel or legal action pending, or legal counsel providing advice, and therefore making them unavailable. But I want to make sure that my assumption isn't wrong. Is that what was going on with them too? In other words, a situation similar to Drs. Fenton and Feinstein, or something else?
No, Your Honor. My understanding is that from Ms. Tish McGuire, and this was before actually I was on the case, as the court may know, was that neither of them had counsel at the time that this interview was conducted.
All right, Mr. King.
Judge, they were being represented by the university, and they did make themselves available to us very, very early on, but subsequently refused to talk to us.
But was it through the university's attorney?
Yes, that's what the communication came through.
Oh, okay.
They weren't being sued, as far as I know, as individuals,
right.
Nor did they have private counsel, but they were being represented by the university counsel.
All right, and the university counsel then indicated to you that they would not be available to be interviewed?
They would no longer be willing to talk to us.
Okay, I wanted to make sure I hadn't assumed something that was wrong. Okay, let's bring the jury in, please. Please be seated. The record should reflect that the jury is back in the courtroom. Welcome back, folks. Dr. Gurr, I remind you that you're still under oath, and Mr. Brockler, you may proceed with your cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Gurr, there's a place in your report, a couple pages from where we were, where you asked the defendant about his thoughts during the shooting. Can you find that for me?
If you have it, can you tell me what page?
Again,
Maybe
the way I did this was to kind of cut and paste things into a thing. I don't have the
okay.
exact page.
Okay, it will take, I'm looking.
That's our second one.
May I ask you, is this on the first visit of December 19th we are on?
Well, I sure think it is, but give me a second here. I don't want to have screwed this up for you or for me. Hang on one sec.
Okay, I'm looking too.
Actually, you know what, that may be February or May, and I don't want to get out of order too much, even though I asked you to advance a couple pages over. Let's try to stick with January. Forgive me for that.
Okay.
You describe in the December meeting with him that he, after the breakup with his girlfriend, and it was really about 5 months that they were together, October through end of February, and then some sort of friend with benefits thing for about March. Is that fair?
After she broke up with him, they agreed to be together on friendly terms, and then he took the initiative of saying there's no point in this relationship.
So they were together about 5 months, from about October to the end of February, with some of that other stuff going on in March. Fair?
About, yeah.
Okay, and after that, he tells you, and this is in quotes, that he was incapacitated, lying in bed, unable to move. Do you see that?
I remember the words, but I'm not on the page.
It's a paragraph that begins, he was decompensating in graduate school.
Yes, I'm there, page 8.
Okay, thank you. And you see that part there where he was very isolated and incapacitated, lying in bed, unable to move. Do you see that?
Yes.
All right. Now, you've had a chance prior to this and certainly after this to look at everything that was going on, that was documented in the defendant's life at the time that his girlfriend broke up and even afterwards, correct?
Yes.
Can you tell me and point to what is the evidence, other than him saying it, that he was incapacitated, unable to move?
The section titled Examinations, Visit 1 through 4,
Yeah.
specifically focus on the interview and the information that I obtained from Mr. Holmes. They do not include evidence from the outside on that. If you're asking me if I'm aware that during this time he was still going to school and it was being on email and was, paying his bills and functioning and using his bike and going to the gym, I am aware. His report was that if, we consider 24 hours a day, the number of hours that he was spending in bed, unable to function, preoccupied, incapacitated, his words, was higher relative to what it was before. And I was focusing on what Mr. Holmes was disclosing to me, the information that I obtained during the interview. So I'm not referring to anything else in these pages.
Is it fair to say then that before you opined that he was insane and schizophrenic in your June 2013 report, that you simply took the defendant at his word as to what was going on and what he did and did not check for corroboration with outside documentation?
Sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead, ma'am.
No, I did have information. So this section of the report focuses on the details that I've obtained from him, only from him, during the interview. However, the final conclusion, and maybe you know when I was referring in the introductory section of everything else that I've reviewed and did not detail it, as you know, you've highlighted, is it relates to other activities that, you know, for example, to the chat with Gargi on May 2nd, which is on page 6 of my report. I discussed with him his shooting, everything that he was doing based on the outside. So it included, I knew what were activities in the outside. I know that he was going to school. I know, I've watched his presentation in the class. He's, as part of the graduate school seminar, the required work. I've done all of this, but this is not what I focused on in trying to understand him, his state of mind during that period.
Doctor, what I'm looking for, I guess, is where, before you opine on his sanity and diagnosis, where do you push back and ask for more details from him, like, hey, give me an example of what you mean by incapacitated, especially in light of the fact that he's going to 24-hour fitness 5, 6, 7 times a month. He's going to King Super, shopping for the same foods in July that he was shopping for back in the previous August. Where's that sort of, hey, help me understand what you mean by these words before I rely upon them to say that you were insane on July 20th?
Objection, compound question.
Overruled.
Go ahead, doctor.
So incapacitated, as I said, referred to a general increased proportion of time that was difficult for him to mobilize himself to the same level that was required from him previously for schoolwork. So it's a proportion. It's not like that he was 24 hours a day lying in bed doing nothing. There was a greater time that he felt, reported feeling, that at this time he was incapacitated. His perception, his experiences were that he was incapacitated by the turmoil, his inner experiences.
Incapacitated and unable to move.
Yeah.
All right. But you'd agree with me that in reviewing the records that were available, even if you didn't include them in your report or you just considered them however, you'd agree with me, there simply isn't any documented evidence of the defendant's inability to move or incapacitation over any period of time before he walks into that theater on July 20th, 2012.
I believe that short of having a video camera in his own apartment and measuring the number of hours as he's in jail, measuring the number of hours that he's up and he's lying in bed, is moving or not moving at night and in the afternoon, it is his report that he was incapacitated. And I do take into account in the insanity, my conclusions regarding the insanity, that he has continued functioning and doing things that he was doing before, like shopping for food and doing other things that he was doing before. I do not believe that these preclude the status of insanity. At the time that he went, as you mentioned, that he went into the theater on July 20th, 2012.
Now, you'd agree with me that nowhere in this report of June of 2013 do you include any of the details of his activities in terms of working out on a regular basis, shopping for healthy food on a regular basis, continuing virtually uninterrupted in every other single activity that's documented in his life. You'd agree you don't put any
But
of that
I'd
in here.
object to the mischaracterization of continuing in every other area of his life.
Objection? The objection's overruled?
Go ahead, doctor. You don't put any of that in your report, correct?
It's not in my report, correct.
Okay. And so that we're clear, based on the description you've given us, when you use the phrase incapacitation or an inability to move, that does not impact his ability to do all the things that we just talked about that he was able to do that you didn't document, correct?
It is present to a degree as far as duration. It is present to a degree where he is able to continue his activities. There's a difference, I will say, between going to bed and sleeping, normally, and having a restful night, and getting up in the morning, and looking forward to the next classes and interactions, to lying in bed and pondering about and thinking about what am I going to do, my life is falling apart. I call it being somewhat incapacitated. And that's how he described it, and that's what I conveyed. This is not normal for a first-year graduate student.
Fair that you relied upon his description and characterization for that inclusion in your report, right?
Correct. All of the examination is totally based, the part of the report is totally based on his report, words, and my clinical observation. And I said that and I emphasize it. That's how I broke it down. Yes.
Without scrutiny to the other records that might suggest that what he's saying is untrue or an embellishment.
No, that's not the case. The purpose of this section of the report is to provide as a representative sample as possible of the information that I obtained during direct evaluation.
So that I'm clear, so that we're all clear. Your point wasn't to put in everything important in this report, but to just be a sample of the conversation you had with him? Is that what you just said?
No, I said that the section of this report of my evaluation of him, visit 1, visit 2, visit 3, is the information that I obtained from him during the evaluation.
Okay.
My conclusion at the end is based on all the information that was available to me at the time of writing this report.
Does your conclusion indicate in this report of June of 2013 that you found records that were inconsistent with his claims of inability to move and incapacitation?
It is not in my report.
Understood. Now there's something else that you indicate right after that where you say, and you put this in quotes, that really the only thing that gets him going is he felt a call for action. Do you see that? And to develop a strategy in which shooting at others will be necessary. End quote. Do you see that?
Just 1 second.
It's right after the...
Yeah, I went back to the other pages, so I'll be...
Sorry. Take your time.
I'll be right with you. Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Now, there's a
I'm there.
couple things I want to ask you about his exact words to you there. He said that he felt he needed to develop a strategy in which shooting at others will be necessary, correct?
Yes.
Not a strategy where killing others will be necessary, right?
Shooting were the words.
But not shooting others, shooting at others. That's how you phrased it.
Correct.
And that's what he said, right?
Yes.
The other thing that's important here, it looks like from the quote, is that it was a call for action. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And because it's in quotes, you can take it to the bank. That's what he said.
Yes.
Right? That phrase shows up in this report opining on his schizophrenia and insanity no less than 6 times. Does that sound about right?
I didn't count, but I trust you counting.
Well, and you would remember that, man, he repeated this thing all the time. I put it in quotes many times, correct? Is that yes?
Yes.
The other thing that you notice then from the record is that after this report in June of 2013, 2 months later, a court-appointed forensic psychiatrist named Dr. Jeffrey Metzner begins his evaluation of the defendant, correct?
Yes.
And Dr. Metzner specifically asked him, within about 2 months of this report, did you ever use the phrase, a call for action? Do you remember reading that in his report?
Yes.
And the defendant says, I've never said that. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And in fact, Dr. Reed, who then does a forensic psychiatric evaluation of the defendant after Dr. Metzner, you saw the 23 hours of video, correct?
I did.
And the phrase, a call for action, shows up in there exactly 0 times. You'd agree with that?
Yes.
And yet, after that set of interviews, you then sit down with the defendant again in November of 2014, just 2 months before the trial starts, right?
Yes.
And he uses the phrase, a call for action with you again, doesn't he?
Yes.
That's interesting, right? You didn't find that interesting?
No.
Well, how about this? A call for action. He denies using it with Dr. Metzner. You read that part, right?
Yes.
Now, did you ever follow up with him in any of your subsequent meetings to the 2 court-appointed psychiatrists who found him sane and say, hey, why did you say you didn't say this to me? Did you ask him that question?
No.
You had an opportunity to review all of his writings that you've told us you had access to, his emails, his texts, his G-chats, his notebook, correct?
Yes.
And you would agree that nowhere in any of those does the phrase, a call for action, appear, right?
Right.
The only person who ever attributes that phrase to him is you, correct?
Yes.
Now, is it fair to go back and look at his past writings to see if that phrase has some particular importance to him? You'd agree with that? That's important, isn't it?
In reviewing his writing,
Right. Correct?
it can be.
So he denies saying it to you. You say he said it, correct?
Yes.
Maybe, I want to ask you, don't you think it's possible that this is a phrase that has some significance to you? And maybe it's from another case, maybe it's from some other thing that it has just found its way into this report. Isn't that possible? A call for action?
Unlikely.
But it could happen.
I mean, everything can happen, but I'm not surprised to your question, why did he say things to me that he did not say to other people?
No, that wasn't my question, Doctor.
No.
That wasn't my
I
question.
mean, that the call for action is something that he said to me and he denied to other professionals. It's possible that he will deny it. What was his state of mind when he was denying it? Did he want to appear good? He didn't want to appear sick. He did not. He was trying to do his best not to reveal the significant mental defect that he had. So I'm not surprised. And I think that I made him feel comfortable during the evaluation for him to reveal to me information. And that's not uncommon in people with schizophrenia, not whatsoever. Especially when I saw him, early in the course, and I spent significant amount of time and effort for him to establish some rapport with him so I can obtain information. And it's not that different from a call for action or from mission or from the floodgates. It's all very similar. It describes terms that are documented in his record and were obtained by the other psychiatrists that are very similar. I mean, we can go word by word. Was it action? Was it mission? Well, I think that it conveys exactly the same type of information.
Thank you. The quotes, though, were a call for action. You agree with that?
Yes.
And I just want to make sure that, and I appreciate that paragraph there, but I want to make sure that the question that I'm asking you is answered. And that is, you don't find in the record anywhere other than with you that this defendant has ever written, uttered, texted, chatted, or ever the phrase a call for action, correct?
Yes.
Been asked and answered.
Overruled.
Go ahead, doctor.
I said yes.
But that phrase, you agree, that phrase could have found its way into your report because it has special significance to you, correct?
I said unlikely. I don't think so.
Okay, Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Doctor, you've written a book here. I want to show it to you. Called If Your Adolescent Has Schizophrenia. Is that it?
One we went over yesterday.
Is this your book?
It's my book.
There's a chapter 6. Can you read for us what chapter 6 is entitled?
Conclusion, a call for action.
Thank you.
That's a very different context.
Doctor,
Doctor,
wait for
thank
the
the
next
thank
question.
you.
But-
Thank you.
Doctor, wait for
Thank
the
you.
next question. Go ahead, ask your question.
So that is a phrase that has had importance to you in another context, correct?
You want me to answer it and put it in context?
I want to ask you if it was important to you in another context, Doctor.
Totally different.
I understand. The phrase is a call for action. You'd agree, right?
I've used the summary of this book on a call for action in understanding mental illness in adolescent. It has nothing to do with the defendant, with Mr. Holmes. Nothing to do. I mean, look at when the
understand.
book was written. Totally out of context.
I understand, Doctor. Thank you for that explanation. There is a part in here where you talk about, as he saw it, life was meaningless, for him, was meaningless and not purposeful. Do you see that?
Yes.
And that turns out to be a repeated and significant issue for the defendant as he talks to you and other mental health professionals, that he feels like he's lost his purpose in life. You'd agree with that?
Yes.
And then you go on to describe this thing where he says that he tells you that he thought he would wound some, but didn't know he would kill. Correct?
Yes.
Now, I get that that's December 19th, 2012. That's your first time with him. But that must have struck you as completely inconsistent with every other document you'd received leading up to July 20th, 2012, correct?
Yes.
And you, before you issue this opinion saying that he is insane and schizophrenic, you do not confront him with those inconsistencies. Correct?
I did discuss with him, and you will say it's not in my report, what does he mean that he was going to wound people and not to kill them?
You asked him that?
Yeah.
We didn't even hear that on direct exam. Tell us. I mean, this will be the first time anyone's heard it, right?
That he did say wounded people. I mean, what if you read the entire sentence, is that he thought he would wound some, but didn't know or he'd kill.
Yeah.
And my conclusion from follow-up with him was that he found it difficult to tell me that he came into the theater to shoot and kill people. During the first evaluation, he tried to look good. So my conclusion was that he came to kill, prepared himself to kill people. And that saying, I came to wound people was perhaps his effort to look good. He tried to look his best during the first evaluation.
So is it fair to say that despite the battery of tests and stuff that Dr. Hanlon gave him and Drs. Gray and Manguso and all that, the defendant, when he spoke with you and other mental health professionals, still retained the ability to manipulate the perception of what he had done and what he thought?
Objection, Judge.
Overruled.
Go ahead, Doctor. He still retained the ability to do that, didn't he?
I don't see it as a manipulation of, you can call it manipulation. I don't see it as a manipulation. I see that, something that he mentioned about wounding people, later on killing people. It was just progression during obtaining information.
One of the things that's also absent from your report and your notes is any indication that you followed up with him after in this conversation where you said, "What are you talking about, man? You thought you would kill people. You intended to kill people." You don't ever write anything like that in here, correct?
I don't write it, but I discussed it with him.
You
Of
did?
course I did,
Yep.
as part of the evaluation.
Part of the evaluation that up until this moment has been a secret you've kept?
Objection, Judge, to a secret that she's kept. This is in her report, it's in her notes, it's been testified to ad nauseum.
The speaking objection is overruled.
Doctor, you would agree with me that nowhere in your notes about December 19th, 2012, or your report do you indicate any follow-up with him about that statement, which you said at the time it was made you were skeptical of, right?
Yeah, it did not fit reality of what happened.
But you don't put anything in here about following up with him right there and saying, "What are you talking about? You went in there to kill people."
I did not put in my report question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. I was paying attention and conveyed the information accurately that he provided. He said exactly what I said. Was this real? No. We know what he did. We know, and I followed it up later on, and it's that he intended to kill people, as many as possible.
Yeah.
I'm not a fool.
Yeah. My question to you, though, was because of his ability to do that, you'd agree that even when speaking with you, a mental health professional, and presumably others, he retained the ability to manipulate the information that he provided to people to manage their perception of him. Would you agree with that?
Objection, Your Honor. It's commenting on credibility. That's
Overruled.
forbidden by the court.
Overruled.
Doctor,
I do not.
he did not have the ability to do that. Correct?
It did not. My conclusion, based on the interaction there, was that it was not, because it's something that was conveyed later on. It was not done in order to manipulate me to believe that he just came in to wound some people. No.
He said it to you to manipulate your perception of him. You've already told us that, right?
Objection, asked and answered.
Overruled.
Go ahead, doctor.
Objection, Judge, that was not what her testimony or her answer was. It's a mischaracterization of the witness's answer.
The speaking objection is overruled. Doctor, did you understand the question, or do you want him to ask it again?
Perhaps ask it again.
Ask the question again.
Thank you, Your Honor. He had the ability to try to manipulate your perception of him when you interviewed him on December 19th, 2012.
The reason it is hard for me to answer is that I don't see it, that he was sitting at that time in his chair and thinking, how am I going to answer a question so she likes me more or she thinks about me differently?
I understand.
You know?
There's also the phrase that you discussed with Mr. King yesterday, where you said that he picked the theater in response to a question you asked because he liked movies, correct?
This was his first answer.
That's
to
right.
Why did you pick the theater?
And-
Because I like movies.
And instantly you knew that's not the whole story, correct?
Correct.
And nowhere in your notes or your report does it show you pushing back on him or even confronting him with what he put in the notebook, which were months-long surveillance and casing of the Century 16 Theater, correct?
I did not put it at that sentence in the report, but I alluded to it later on.
Alluded
on the
to it?
shooting.
Did you say
Yeah,
alluded
it's
to it?
mentioned.
Okay.
Alluded maybe is not the right word,
We'll get
but it's mentioned.
Yes, ma'am. We'll get there. There was something else that you described with Mr. King where you recounted a part of a conversation where you said you asked him about school and walking down the halls and how, as he was describing the anxiety he felt walking down the halls at school, he became red-faced and emotional. Do you remember that?
Yes,
That's important enough to have put in your report, correct?
yes.
Can you find in your report where you reference that event? Him walking down the halls and then becoming emotional with you as he talked about it.
As I stated before, I did not include specifics in this report. I did not include what he told me for every component. The report is brief, but provides the information that I believed is important to convey and can be supplemented with me being here and being asked about it.
Good news, doctors. We actually have your notes that you took, as you described to us, immediately after that meeting where you wrote down, as you told us yesterday, all the important information that he gave you. Take a look at your notes, if you would, and find where you describe him getting emotional, talking to you about walking down the hallways at school.
It is not, I don't have to look, it is not in my notes on the high school, but that's what he told me. This was the context of the time that he got emotional, describing his anxiety walking down the hallways of high school. I did not going out, as I said in the first report. I was concentrating on interacting with him, observing him, his demeanor, his facial expression, movements, and establishing rapport with him. I did not write at that time in his presence as soon as I left. Time was limited and I did not write every event, but this is clear in my memory that this was the context of what was presented, talking about high school.
Is it fair then, in the absence of it being in your notes and your report, you are remembering it for us yesterday, July 7th, 2015, some 2 years and 8 months after he told it to you, correct?
No,
You're not remembering it from that?
I'm reporting it here a time after that, but I'm remembering it from the time that I've evaluated him and related it to the defense team.
So you told them about it?
Yeah, about the context of his emotions. Yes, it is not detailed in my reports. They did not correct or provided information for my reports. I did it, as I said yesterday, all by myself.
Now,
So-
that's helpful because you do document in your report his emotional responses to things that you talk to him about, correct?
Correct.
But not that one. Correct?
Yeah, I do not mention specifically high school.
In fact, the only time you attribute him becoming emotional, red-faced, grimacing like crying, lip shaking, hands tightening, he couldn't talk and was breathing deeply. That's from your report, right?
Yes,
And you said that that came up when he was describing his hopelessness, despair, pain. Do you remember that?
yes.
And the hurt he caused to the family members of those he killed, right?
Objection, Your Honor. May we approach?
Yes. The objection is overruled.
Forgive me, Doctor, I'm catching up. I think we had just talked about when you did document in your report that the defendant became emotional as you've previously described. You recall that?
Yes.
Okay. You go into, in another paragraph, you go into probing further about perceptions and experiences. Do you see that?
Yes.
And one of the things that he says is that he had heard noises but did not provide details, correct?
Yes.
You did not probe further about that, correct?
I did. It is not in my report how I probed and what question did I ask. What noises do you hear? When do you hear it? Can you imitate the noise if you have heard to me? He did not want to respond. He did not respond. I did not have information, but I probed. I did not take his word for it. In other words, and left the interview saying, oh, well, he heard some noises. I asked him. He did not provide an answer. He sat there.
To be clear, though, on that issue, you followed up with him and asked more probing questions, correct?
I followed up and asked probing questions on every issue. It is not documented, as you have pointed out.
Okay.
Question, answer, question, answer. But I did.
Okay. Then the other thing, and it reads, he said he heard noises but did not provide details. End of sentence. You'd agree with that, right?
Yes.
You also write down, he also, quote, saw things moving in the room when no one else did, period, end quote. Correct?
Yes.
And then you write down, when I requested more details, he looked at the wall behind me and said, quote, right there. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And you actually demonstrated for us. He pointed at something and
Yes,
said
at
right
the
there.
wall behind, correct.
Now that is psychiatrically significant, isn't it?
Can be.
He's having a visual hallucination right in front of a
Yes.
psychiatrist. That's a big deal, right? Correct?
It can be, it's an important information to observe.
And document, right?
I documented.
Yeah, it shows up in the June 2013 report, right?
Yes.
I want you to go to your notes that you generated on December 19th in 2012 and find for us where you indicate that he says right there and points to the wall behind you. And I'll freely admit, Doctor, your handwriting is a challenge for me. That's not your fault, but if it's in there, didn't find it.
That he looked at the wall is not in the note that I took after the interview.
Nor is the part where you indicate he points to a visual hallucination he's having in front of you and announces right there, correct?
Judge, that's a mischaracterization of her direct testimony.
Overruled?
Go ahead, Doctor. Is that
So
in there?
what I said is that he looked at the wall when we were discussing. Let me read from my notes. May I?
Sure.
Okay. He also, quote, saw things moving in the room when no one else did, close quote. And at that time, he was looking, when we were discussing it, he was looking at the wall behind, and when I was probing, what do you see? He was pointing right there. When I left the room and I was sitting and summarizing quickly, I did not put it in my note. I recall it vividly. It was unusual, but it did not provide. I didn't say hallucination because there was nothing at the wall and he did not say, what did he see? It might have been some light. So, it can be clinically significant, but it's not a detailed description here of an hallucination that is provided before. And I'm careful with, concluding from that. So say he saw things, and as I said in the next sentence, is that as it was toward the end of the evaluation, it was not the time to probe further. Probe further. I probed. I didn't get anywhere. So I did not call it an hallucination. I'm careful with the description of the information that I obtained.
Doctor, I just want to be clear then, based on this information you've just testified to, is that you asked him if he saw things no one else saw, and he agreed, right?
Yes.
And then he points during the interview to something behind you that you don't see, correct?
Turning at the wall, no. No, there was nothing at the wall.
But what did he point at?
At the wall behind.
Okay, he points at the wall. There's
Behind.
nothing there, right?
There's nothing there.
And he says, right there,
There.
in quotes, correct?
Yes.
That feels a lot like a visual hallucination. He is seeing things that aren't there, correct?
It might be. It doesn't detail it. My observation that I said I need to probe it further is that this is a behavior that can be consistent with a visual hallucination. It may be consistent. I do not draw a clinical conclusion when I probe and there's nothing that he can tell me and he sits quiet that I reported what I saw is exactly, pointed at the wall. That's it.
Yeah, I understand. Doctor, you did not ask him any other questions that you documented afterwards, like, hey, what do you mean when you point to the wall at nothing and say right there? What are you seeing? That's not in your report.
It's not in my report. The sentence is, it was not the time to probe further because it did not provide further information and it was toward the end of the evaluation.
So you asked him, what do you mean by right there? Did you ask him?
I looked back. There was nothing there. What is there? There was no response.
Did you ask him, doctor, whether he saw something? Did you ask him, what do you mean by right there?
Yes, I did.
And what answer did he give?
He did not give an answer.
That is not documented in your notes or your report, correct? You don't say, I asked him and he did not provide an answer, or he refused to answer, or he just stared blankly at me. Nothing like that appears, right?
It does not appear. As I said, I did not record question and answer during that. What I said, it was not the time to probe further. I probed. I asked. I didn't get anywhere. The first report, the first encounter was very difficult. As I testified, it was like pulling teeth at that time.
I understand. Doctor, but the fact is this, when you sat down, as you described to us, immediately after this meeting, to write down all of the things that you believed were important, and I'm referring to your notes here, this is what you wrote down. He said he heard, quote, noises, but didn't provide details. He also, quote, saw things, unquote, moving in the room when no one else did. As it was toward the end of the evaluation, it was not the time to probe further. That's the extent of your notes, correct?
Correct.
And that means that 6 months, almost to the day, after you did not write this potential hallucination that occurred in front of you in your notes, you remembered it for the June 17th, 2013 report where you opined that he was insane and schizophrenic. Is that true?
Yes.
Now, in this first meeting, there's only one reference to the notebook, and it's not even referred to as a notebook. You'd agree with that? Correct?
Can you tell me what you're referring to, please?
It's the very next sentence after he saw something right there and pointed to the wall, that part.
Okay.
It says, at that point, he mentioned that he wrote a journal
Yes,
He called it a journal. Is that right?
yes,
And it was to explain what he was going through, correct?
yes.
Now, you'd already seen the journal, correct?
I saw the journal. It's something that I told you I will check
Oh, yeah.
yesterday,
What'd you find
so
out?
I can report. I saw the journal on November 28th, 2012, for about an hour. I did not have a copy of the journal because of legal issues. I'm not familiar and did not inquire about the legal issues, but it was not left for me. The actual copy of the notebook or journal I received on February 13, 2013. So in the first meeting on December 19th, 2012, I did not have the journal with me. I had recollection and I did not write down notes when I saw the journal for about an hour, I did not write down notes based on that.
Why not?
Legally, the journal at that time was not made available to me. I looked at the journal in order to obtain preliminary information, and I follow the guidelines of the defense to maintain, the legal procedures. I'm not a lawyer, but the journal was not made available. But I wanted to take a look at the journal and went through it, I estimate about an hour, in order to consider, as I said, based on the information, including a review of the journal by myself, if it is consistent or suggests a psychotic process. And if you note, when I think it's on my note, at the end of the first interview, on that date, when you asked me to go yesterday over my handwriting, at the end of the page of my note, TTD, things to do, an abbreviation.
Doctor, forgive me. Do you feel like this is responsive to my question about whether you took notes about the notebook?
Yes, because I say, his notebook, things that I need to do is go over the notebook when you have it. I didn't have it
And we'll
to
get
evaluate for psychosis.
Yep. We'll get into that in your May meeting, if we can get there, okay?
Okay.
Now, in this particular time, though, when he tells you, hey, I wrote this journal, these 28 pages that you spent an hour with, to explain what I was going through, you must have thought to yourself, wow, there's a good chunk of this that is actually just planning for this crime, right?
Yes.
You don't confront him with that at that time. Is that fair?
I had a different strategy.
Understood. But that
My-
strategy included not confronting him at that time about his description of the journal. Fair?
The journal, I was waiting to get the journal so I can go over it. Furthermore, I believe it was important to get information from him without the journal and any documents in front of him, to get his description, details in response to questions, and then coming back with the journal when I have it and review it with him, and I evaluated the consistency between what he told me without the journal and what he told me when he had the journal, and compared it also to the other professionals who have evaluated him with the journal. And I found it, many items, many descriptions were consistent. And this is not uncommon. It's not an uncommon approach. I think you get information provided without the journal that was not available to me.
Your Honor, I don't know the court schedule. With the court's permission, could I go into one other quote before we take our break, or does the court want to take a break right now?
Well, you can do it if you can do it within the next few minutes, 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. I want to refer you to another quote where you begin to talk with him about his thoughts during the shooting. Can you find that?
Yes.
And you put down as the words that he spoke to you, quote, getting killed was an option, comma, being captured was another, end quote. Do you see that?
Yes.
And that was said just like you put it there in quotes, fair?
Yes.
And all in one sentence fragment, correct?
Yes.
And it was in response to your question, what do you think's going to happen?
Yes. His thoughts during the shooting.
Yep, right,
Yeah.
right, exactly. That is, you would agree that that statement makes it seem like he didn't have an idea or a thought of what would happen when he engaged in the shooting, correct?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Regarding being killed or captured, it sounds like because of that one very specific quote in response to your question, what do you think would happen, that he sort of looked at them as equivalents, like a 50-50. Is that how you took it?
I took it as an option. What can be the outcome? An outcome can be that I will get killed or I will be captured.
Now that's...
I didn't ask him, is it 50-50?
I understand. That's different than, let's say, had you asked him, hey, couldn't you have been killed? And he said, well, that's an option. And then you ask him, well, what do you think's going to happen? And he says, I think I'm going to be captured. That's different than what you just put in that quote right there, right? I mean, I'm trying to differentiate the two meanings that you would have attributed to those, correct?
I'm not sure what you're asking. I'm trying really to answer. I'm not sure what you asked me. I mean, I put down what he told me.
Okay. Well,
When I asked about the shooting and he said, getting killed was an option, being captured was another. That's it.
Just in one quote, that was how quick it came out.
Yes.
Okay, let's go to your notes.
Okay.
And if you find that session, I want to read that if I could, and you tell me if I'm misstating anything in there.
Okay.
Discussing the shooting. I asked if he thought he might get killed, comma. He said, quote, that was an option, end quote. He protected himself. I asked if he thought what will happen later. He said, quote, I will be captured. And I asked, and he said, I didn't think about it. Do you see that?
Yes.
That is actually the quote of what he said to you. Fair?
Yes.
That is not what you put in your report as the quote that he said to you, correct?
I don't see I don't see the difference. It's the same information.
You have taken answers to two different questions and combined them into a single quotation that you attribute to a complete...
Maybe I didn't put 3 little dots between the quote, the words that I put, but it conveys the information of what I've asked him, that he can be killed is one possibility. He might get killed or he might get captured. So are you referring that, in quoting it, because these are quotes in the note that I took, that I could be killed, ... or I could be captured.
Doctor, what I'm referring to is the fact that when you proposed to him, could he be killed, he responded, that was an option, but then told you he'd taken steps to protect himself. Then you followed up with, well, what do you think will happen? And he said, captured. That's not what you put in the quote. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, but there was much more. There was much more in the discussion of going back. I didn't spend, almost in that interview, almost, 3 hours of just, if you read this, you'll read it in 10 minutes. Even with a bad handwriting, I didn't spend that. I spent many, many efforts to go back and forth, and maybe I didn't put the 3 dots, but...
Doctor, it's fair to say you created that quote, yes?
Yes.
What other quotes did you create in your report finding him
insane and schizophrenic.
I don't understand what you ask.
You created this quote. He did not say these words to you in the manner in which you put them in your report or you testified to him here today. That's clear. I'm asking you if you've done
Objection,
it
that
any other...
misstates the witness's answer, Your Honor. It's a
Overruled.
mischaracterization.
Overruled, she's free
Yeah,
to
so
disagree. Hold on,
I-
hold on. Let me finish. My ruling is it's overruled. She's free to disagree if she wants to. Go ahead.
I disagree.
Doctor, you would agree now that the defendant never said to you, being killed was one option, comma, being captured was the other, as you have testified to and put in your report. He never said it like that, correct?
It is possibly a combined sentence, but the words are his words. And the only thing that I can say is that with all the information and repeated questions and doing it right after that, I did not put the 3 dots that might have been before. But to be killed, you know that this, and the option of being killed and being captured is the word that he used. Being killed or captured are the options that he used.
The other parts that are missing are the questions you asked to get there. Fair?
Yeah, and from your perspective, they're missing in everything else, and I said so, that the sentences reflect major points that I've brought up in its discussion, but it does not reflect question, answer. It does not.
And it does not reflect accurate quotes, correct?
I believe that the quotes that you're saying is including words that he said, but maybe not in one sentence. There are 2 sentences, and combined, capture a couple of points, words that he used. But the major options that he considered at that time were that he will be killed or he will be captured.
Are there other places, before we break for lunch, are there other places in your report that you can think of where you took that kind of editorial liberty and combined answers into one quote to express what you thought was the gist of what he was saying?
Object to the form of the question as argumentative.
Overruled.
Doctor?
I can't recall things like that, and if you point them out to me, as you did now, I will do my best to answer your question. But I do not believe that what I've put there are words that he has not used.
Thank you. This is a good time, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. All right, members of the jury, let's go ahead and take our lunch break. Please make sure that you abide by all the admonishments related to your conduct, okay? And I'll see you back here at about 1:35, all right? We'll take an hour and a half. Thank you. Okay, the record should reflect the jury has exited the courtroom. Let's go ahead and take our lunch break, and then let's have counsel back, maybe 1:20 or so, if it's okay, and then I can give you a ruling on Exhibit D-TR-97, or at least the reasons for the ruling, okay? So let's have you back at about 1:20. The court will be in recess.